Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 192 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight we're pleased to be sharing our platform with some of our listeners to talk about a very important topic.
And we will head over to the common room in just a moment. But first, folks, I'm Shawn Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, Alan Sisto.
Thank you, Shawn. Now, before we bring in our guests tonight, we want to talk a little bit about how this episode came to be. You've likely heard us talk about the fellowship of the podcast. I mean, let's face it, we mention our Patreon community every episode.
Well, and for good reason. Those folks help support our show. Members get exclusive content like 5 to 10 minute postscripts on our chapter-based episodes and quarterly full-length episodes on special topics chosen by one of our patrons.
Now, the list of names that we include at the end of every episode, those folks at the Kierdan's contribution tier, well, choosing the topic of those quarterly specials is one of their perks. And in summer of 2018, we heard from one of them who wanted us to tackle a really serious topic.
Yeah, she said she'd been, and I'm going to quote here, reading an article in a major American newspaper about a man who was one of the founders and editors of a white nationalist website. There was a list of books which they encouraged their followers to read, which support their point of view of white superiority, and on the list was The Lord of the Rings. Well, our patron asked us to research this and address the topics of racist movements using Tolkien's work to justify their stance, and the broader question of racist content in Tolkien's work.
Now, ordinarily, only our patrons get to hear these special episodes. But as we researched and recorded this special, we realized the topic was too important to limit it to the less than 200 patrons that we had at the time. So we asked them if they would allow us to release it to the main feed. The answer was unanimous, and 2 years ago, in February of 2019, we released the special to our main feed as episode 114.
Yeah, and it was pretty well received by many listeners. I mean, I think I speak for both of us when I say we're pretty proud of the work that we did on it.
Yeah.
But we did get some valid criticisms of it as well. And one of those valid criticisms was that the way we tackled it by looking at Tolkien's intentions was really only part of the answer. It's not only a question of intent, but also of impact. And so there's another question entirely that needed to be discussed, which is how Tolkien's words come across to readers today, regardless of whether he himself was racist.
That's right. Now, that means finding out how readers who have experienced racism react to the work and gaining a better understanding of the aspects of Tolkien's work that have been perceived as more problematic or even hurtful to certain groups approaching the work. And admittedly, that was part of the conversation that Shawn and I, as two middle-aged white guys, didn't have any frame of reference to talk about in a meaningful way.
Yeah, but we knew, even then, that when the time was right, we would want to revisit the issue and actually bring some folks on the show who could discuss Tolkien's works from their own perspective and give us some of that insight that we don't have.
That's right. And then last June, the subject came to the forefront again, but this time it was also about how the Tolkien fandom was dealing with race in Tolkien and in the fandom itself after an incident from Tolkien 2019 had come to light. Now, combine that with the growing understanding among so many of us, especially here in America, about racial matters in general, and we knew it was time to come back to this subject.
Yeah. And so what we did was we put out an open invitation on all of our social media channels for people of color, anyone who was willing to come on our show and talk about race in Tolkien and in the Tolkien fandom. Now, it took us some time to line everything up in our production schedule, but we're happy to say that today's the day. We're going to be joined today by 3 guests, each of whom having the opportunity to discuss this from their perspective, share their thoughts, their feelings, and their unique experiences.
Now, creating this episode was a learning experience for us, and we are grateful to each of our guests for helping us, and hopefully each of you, to understand this subject from perspectives other than our own. But before we begin, we need to make some things clear. The opinions shared by our guests are their own.
Yeah, our goal going into this episode, and this was something that we were both very conscious of, was we wanted to keep our own mouths shut as much as possible for a change.
Which is rare, yeah.
It is rare. But for this episode, we're here to listen, not to challenge.
Right.
And while, like all of our shows, this one was recorded ahead of time and it was edited for sound quality and nervous coughs and things like that.
Sure.
But we're not editing to change the substance in any way, and we have not attempted to steer the conversation in any way besides the questions you'll hear us ask.
Well, right. And of course, we didn't want to steer the conversation because our goal, unlike our previous episode on the topic, is not to find our own interpretation here, but to listen for other voices. Our purpose today is to provide a platform to encourage conversation and to learn.
And we hope you'll appreciate it. And we hope you'll be inspired to engage in the conversation yourself in a constructive way in
Mhm.
our amazing listener community spanning all of our social media spaces. At our common room on Facebook, you'll find comments, questions, corrections, and more on every episode, as well as updates from us throughout the week. Just look for the Prancing Pony Podcast on Facebook.
And of course, we have some really good discussions going on over on Reddit, too. You can find us there at r/PrancingPonyPod.
And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram, both with the handle @PrancingPonyPod.
And if you want exclusive content, postscripts, full bonus episodes, or even live Discord events, then check out patreon.com/PrancingPonyPod, where you can support the show by joining the Fellowship of the Podcast.
Folks, please join us in welcoming our first guest this evening.
My name is Amy Koenig. I am currently living in Germany. I am a classicist at the moment. I'm on a postdoctoral fellowship in Munich, and so I'm working at the Bavarian Academy of Sciences.
Oh, wow. All right.
Wow, that's great. And what do your loved ones think of all your Tolkien fandom?
They are very understanding. I mean, in a way, my whole family are kind of Tolkien fans, and my parents were responsible for introducing me and my brother to Tolkien, and my partner really loves Tolkien as well. Maybe not to quite the extent that I do, but they're very, very happy to kind of talk about it with me and, rewatch the movies or talk about the books with me. Yeah.
Well, that's good.
That's great. Mm-hmm. It's always nice to have supportive people in our lives who, if not quite encourage, at least tolerate.
There you go. Yeah.
Tolkien obsession.
We understand that for sure. So you mentioned your parents being responsible for introducing you to Tolkien. When and how did you first discover Tolkien's work? About how old were you?
I honestly don't remember my first encounter with Tolkien. That's how young I was.
Wow.
I think my parents read from The Hobbit to me when I was really little. And then kind of as soon as I started learning to read, I started at least trying to read. So The Hobbit first, and then Lord of the Rings. We had these like really battered paperbacks with awful 80s cover art on them that we read to pieces.
Did Aragorn have a feather, and was Return of the King a red?
They kind of look like D&D cosplay.
A little bit.
Was it the one where Bilbo kind of looks a little bit like Benny Hill with dark hair?
Yeah, that's the one. We had those.
And Legolas kind of looks like Fabio. I had
Yes, he does.
Okay.
Yep. That was my first copy too.
Those are great. We're all of a certain age, it would seem, or close to it. I don't want to denigrate you quite like that, Amy. So,
well, I think they're kind of an inheritance from my parents. So.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Yeah.
But yeah, and then the movies came out when I was a teenager.
Okay.
And I was a fan of those as well, but I was definitely a books first. And I think we also had a cassette tape of the BBC radio production, the one from the 80s.
Okay. So you read the books first and then you saw the movies. What kind of impact do you think that process had? The fact that you were able to read the books before seeing a visual interpretation of them. What kind of impact did that have on how you view race in Middle-earth?
Yeah. So I think, not only that I read the books first, but also I was so young. A
Yeah.
lot of aspects of the books kind of went over my head initially, to be honest. And one of the things I think that I didn't necessarily pick up on immediately was some of the racial implications. This wasn't the only set of books I read as a kid that had kind of some dated language in it. And it certainly wasn't one of the book series that sort of did this most obviously. Like C.S. Lewis comes to mind. I read A Little Princess and The Secret Garden, and all of those, had... So in terms of my ethnic background, my mother is Sri Lankan and my father is white American. And so because like A Little Princess and The Secret Garden contain a lot of descriptions of India that are not great from a modern perspective, those sort of obtruded themselves onto my notice, I think, before I started thinking about Tolkien in that way. I think the movies did bring some of those issues more to the forefront of my mind, but it really took a while, sort of as I started kind of turning to the posthumously published material and returning to the books over and over. As I matured and as I started to think critically about my own background and my own views on race. So it took a while to kind of really start registering it and thinking about it critically.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because here on the Prancing Pony podcast, we love a lot of Tolkien's archaic language, right? I mean, there's things in there like
Mhm.
read oft is found, or midst of the eot is all that the stuff that we
That's
we
great
tend to
stuff,
love. And we
right.
love to point it out when he uses this language.
Yeah.
But then at other times there's other language in there that's a bit old fashioned that is sometimes viewed as racially coded. And that's things like the squinting eyes of the orcs or their swart skin.
Hmm.
And as you just kind of mentioned, the Peter Jackson films, they've also been criticized as being racially coded in their depiction of
Yeah.
orcs and Easterlings and Haradrim and so forth. Tell us a little bit about what you've noticed in the works, books and or movies, and what's your reaction to it?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's something that I absolutely have noticed, and partly because I love archaic language too, in general, and so and partly thanks to my profession, I pay close attention to language, and I mean, I think it is really important to notice the racially coded language and to think about it for what it is. I kind of wanted to, as a sidebar, emphasize from the start that I kind of think that a lot of the more facile debates on race in Tolkien focus, I think, far too much on skin color, and physical appearance in general. And that really does tend to not necessarily do the topic justice, because it is a more modern way of thinking about race and the types of the source material he's drawing on. There's the usual sort of like, somebody says, well, a lot of dark-skinned people are evil in Tolkien, and somebody else says, well, the men of Lothernach are brown-skinned and they're on the side of good. And, the Easterling skin color is not mentioned in the Third Age, so your argument is invalid. And I mean, I think there's some truth and some falsity to what each of those people is saying, but it doesn't really get at the root of the issue on either side. I just wanted to mention that because as a scholar of the ancient world, I'm very familiar with ways that people have discussed racial difference or, revealed racial prejudices without skin color being perceived as a primary axis of that racial difference. So like when Aristotle talks about Asiatic peoples being like naturally suited to servitude, for example, he doesn't talk about skin color as an aspect of that or reflecting that, but that it's still important to talk about as an example of racial or ethnic prejudice, for example. In alongside the racially coded or viewed as racially coded language, I think it's often as or more important to talk about, I guess, what we'd now term cultural imperialism.
Okay.
Like about the way that, at least in the published narrative, it sometimes seems like the peoples of the East and South have kind of fallen under this sway of Sauron worship. And again, this is how it appears in the text, not necessarily how it is, but with relative ease compared to the kind of individualistic resistance of the West and North. Those kind of things.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it seems equally important to talk about that, but that's not to say that the significance and the impact of the racially coded language should be minimized.
You're just taking it from a different angle. You're mentioning that it's not just, the visual appearance of the character. It's the framework that the culture has been placed in and how that has an impact as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
I imagine language is probably a part of that too, isn't it? I mean, I think back to my time studying the classics, and it seems like in the ancient world there was a lot of attention paid to, the way those barbarians talk and things like that on the part of the Greeks and Romans. And, we've just recorded some episodes on the Uruk-hai and talking about the Black speech. And I mean, again, asking you as a classicist, what degree do you feel like language plays in sort of this concept of cultural imperialism in Tolkien?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely it plays a key role. And that's also something that I see having a kind of, as being a little bit of an inheritance of ancient ways of thinking about the world. Because exactly as you say, I mean, to the Greeks in particular, language plays a central role in defining the boundaries of culture. And so sort of Tolkien's sort of centralization of language as kind of embodying cultural difference does have some parallels that one can see there, I think. And yeah, I think that's part of a broader idea that physical appearance is only sort of one of the things that one should be thinking about in this context. And I also wanted to say that a lot of the time, I think this sort of goes to thinking about not only kind of Tolkien's cultural context, but the context of the world he's creating. I mean, Tolkien is using a kind of what might be called a Western European set of aesthetics to code his world. And I think that can be taken as a kind of translation of the biases of the source material. That is the kind of in-universe narrators, who they are, what the limitations of their perspective are. And so a lot of times I do take what I see in the text, including the racially coded language, if you to call it that, as a kind of as an expression of those attitudes rather than necessarily something Tolkien himself is subscribing to. Kind of Watsonian reading and not a Doyleist reading, I guess, if that makes sense.
Sort of the perspective of the character instead of Tolkien himself, sort of the point of view character's reaction to a particular culture. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, kind of. So the idea that Tolkien as translator, in a sense, and this is a way of, kind of translating a particular set of cultural biases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fits within the frame narrative, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'd also say that, I mean, that kind of understanding of what's going on isn't always apparent from the immediate context, and I don't think it's necessarily a shallow reading to still have problems with the language that's there. I'd say that one impression that I got reading the story growing up is that it seemed to me that Tolkien wasn't really thinking of his hypothetical reader as anything other than white. And that's not...
That's fair.
Yeah, that's not like a capital crime or a terrible thing, and that's not something that he was unique in. But I think it's important to acknowledge that I don't really think he was thinking about how it might feel to be a Black reader, reading the description of the men of Farharad, or to be an Asian or a Middle Eastern reader who's reading about like slanting eyes and sallow skin and scimitars.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
There is an assumption that the reader, to some extent, shares the perspective of those things as other.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, that's not a horrible thing, but it is something that I think can be legitimately pointed out and legitimately criticized. Like, he obviously knew people of color, and the UK was not all white, and even Oxford wasn't all white at the time he was writing.
Mm-hmm.
No, certainly not.
Yeah, and so from that perspective, I think it is something that that merits discussion as, from a modern perspective, problematic. But there are also all these other complicated things that are going on with it that that I understand and think about, and I think enrich my understanding of the work as a whole, honestly, to pay attention to it.
I'm sure.
Well, thank you for that. I think that's actually a really eye-opening answer to that question, and I think gives me, as a reader and a podcast host, some things to think about.
Agreed, 100%. Now, we here at the Prancing Pony Podcast have always seen Tolkien's, primary message of the Legendarium as one of togetherness, of people from different races and cultures, elves, men, dwarves, hobbits, ents, joining together to fight a common enemy. Now, that's the angle that we approached it from in our last episode on race in Middle-earth. But, of course, we realize we're middle-aged white guys. Sometimes we realize we're more than middle-aged, but we'll leave that there. We see the world through our own lens, and certainly other interpretations are out there. Some have argued that there's still quite a lot of othering going on in the story that outweighs that sense of togetherness. What's your take on that?
I mean, I would agree that I get that sense of togetherness from the narrative, and that's part of the reason I love Tolkien so deeply, and in a way, part of the reason that I'm so interested in discussing things like race in Tolkien or the othering in the narrative. It's precisely because his values and the message of the narrative seem to go against, or to be fighting against, those sort of what might be taken as lingering, racially problematic, or from a modern perspective, uncomfortable elements in the story.
Sure.
In a way, Tolkien himself kind of taught me to be critical in this way. And the reason I care so much about it is because the message of love and compassion and togetherness is so powerful. Like the most moving moments in the Legendarium to me are those moments of compassion, like Galadriel and Gimli and Lorien, or Sam looking at the dead man of Harad, or Finrod and Andreth in the Athrobeth as well, with a different kind of sort of interracial understanding. And it makes me wish that could extend even further in some ways. Like, one of the things that most enriched my understanding of Tolkien was, and really made me love him even more as a writer, was looking through some of the unpublished material and seeing how much and how carefully he revised and went back and really, in a lot of cases, struggled, I think, to explore the implications of his views and adjust his world accordingly. Like the way he goes back and forth on the origin of orcs, for example.
Exactly what I was thinking of when you started mentioning that. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Or, I mean, to thinking about race again, I mean, pieces like Tal Elmar, where we get this sort of really tantalizing glimpse of Númenóreans as colonizers through the eyes of the indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
So it seems like these are some, questions that did kind of preoccupy him and that he did go back and revisit. And I wish more than anything that we had more of that regarding race specifically. Like one thing that I always kind of like to think about, again, from the perspective of Tolkien as translator of a historical source narrative, is the idea that we could get perspectives from Harad included in the kind of later iterations of the Red Book of Westmarch, like whether turning up in the appendices or what have you. Because you could, I think you can imagine a future where, in the Fourth Age, the kind of effecting of a peace, of a reconcilement, also leading to kind of cultural exchange and intellectual exchange. Like Tolkien's not allegory, but in terms of historical inspiration, Western Europe and the Islamic world had really sustained fascinating intellectual interactions.
Right.
Yeah.
So, that may be really kind of as a sort of pipe dream, what if, imagine what would happen if we had in the Red Book kind of historical source material from Harad talking about the War of the Ring as well.
Yeah.
So we don't just get that kind of, Sam's beautiful moment of compassion is beautiful, but it is from the kind of perspective of the free peoples. We don't get, we don't get an answer to the questions that he asks himself.
No.
Right. That's true.
Yeah. It makes me wonder what would happen if we could.
Well, that is a great what if, isn't it? I can't help but start imagining that in my mind. Thanks for putting that idea in my head. It is a fascinating thought.
It would, and it would give us an opportunity to see a world or a Middle Earth post Sauron, right? And see what happens. Do those divides start to disappear once Sauron is out of the picture? And I think that would have actually been a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah, precisely, because and I think, as you guys have mentioned before, that the idea that this sort of division between races is something that's sown and fomented by the enemy. That could be a really from that perspective, it could be a really wonderful sign that that there is a kind of hope.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
Well, I guess moving on to one of my other questions, which you've kind of hit on a little bit already in one of your previous answers, but you've identified how there are just some elements of the text that they're just going to remain problematic, really.
Yeah.
And I guess I'd ask, you've obviously managed to look past that, or at least accept it as something in the work and still appreciate the work despite it. Do you have any advice for our listeners on how to do that? Because I know that's one thing I think people struggle with a lot in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a difficult question, because I think, everyone has their own perspectives and their own capacities or strategies for dealing with this in a work. I would say, for me, really just to notice it and not pass over it while remaining open-minded about it. I found it really helped to, as I mentioned, to kind of think about it in terms of Tolkien as translator and narrative focalization, and thinking about it as the product of the in-universe narrator, and seeing whether the story itself provides us grounds to see that as a limitation of the chronicler, rather than Tolkien himself. I think thinking about it that way, at least for me, made me more aware of the fascinatingly complex things he was doing as a writer. Yeah, I think it's important to think about, paying attention to this kind of stuff, not necessarily as stemming from an oversimplified view of the work and not producing an oversimplified view of the work, but something that can actually enrich our understanding of it. Not as a kind of tool to shut down appreciation of Tolkien or discussion of Tolkien, but as something that can be a rich part of the discussion. As well as, again, I think Tolkien himself kind of taught me how to read Tolkien, to how to love someone and bring compassion to my interactions with them, while also having an understanding of imperfection and acknowledgement of imperfection that doesn't get in the way of granting them the worth and dignity they deserve. I see that a lot in Tolkien's dialogues like the Arthur-Beth that I mentioned before with
Yeah.
Finrod and Andreth.
Yeah.
You know, how Finrod approaches people actually kind of taught me a lot as a reader and an academic, and I would kind of apply that to Tolkien as well. To love Tolkien, but also remember that he's a fallible person living in a particular time who, I mean, like all of us, doesn't always, you know, fully... trying to find the right way to say this, but doesn't always find himself fully capable of perfectly living up to the values he enshrines. And, you know, and that's okay.
Isn't that all of us, right? I mean, yeah.
That doesn't...
I mean, that's all of us. You're right.
Yeah.
That is absolutely all of us. We have our standards, but we don't always meet them. And it is disappointing when we don't, to be sure.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, Frodo fails and yeah. And I think that's something that Tolkien himself, you know, both as an author and as a Catholic, understood very deeply. And so that, I think, helps me think about it, that it's something you can talk about and that you can acknowledge the impact and even in some cases the hurt that it can bring to people without that resulting in you know, demonizing Tolkien or his work.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe it's just a matter of accepting some imperfections and recognizing them, not accepting them and saying that they're okay, but accepting that they're there and that it's okay to recognize them as being there. And recognizing them doesn't mean that you're, as you said, Amy, trying to demonize Tolkien or trying to negate the value of the work.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. That, I mean, somebody pointing out these instances doesn't necessarily mean that they don't love the work too. And I think that's important to understand.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, what would you like to see future adaptations of Tolkien do differently? We've talked about, you know, adding some content. So I think that's probably where you're headed with this, but including maybe, but not necessarily the Amazon series. What do you want future adaptations to look like in that regard?
Yeah. So I would say something I'd really love to see deals not so much with, say, the race or ethnicity of the actors or the characters, but deals with the kind of the way cultural difference is evoked in the sets and the costumes. I mean, I think what the Jackson movies gave us amazing attention to detail in terms of differentiating cultures.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite aspects of the movies. But I think I'd like to see future adaptations take that further and to convey, and again, I'm speaking as a scholar of the ancient world, kind of the real kind of diversity, color, richness of the worlds that he was drawing on for his aesthetics, like the medieval world, the Byzantine world, the classical world. We know that Greece and Rome weren't the kind of, you know, traditional idea of white marble statues and classical restraint. That's really a kind of retrojection onto the ancient world based on, you know, some later narratives that people wanted to promote. But if you actually look at it, I mean, for example, like archaic Greece, aesthetically speaking, looked a lot like the Near East and Egypt and owes a lot to the Near East and Egypt. And like in the medieval world too, I visited the city of Augsburg in Germany, and I saw the clothes that a bishop from the 13th century was buried in. And he had this beautiful vestment. This was like garb that he would actually have worn in his clerical office, but they were made of Persian cloth and they were embroidered with legends from the Shahnameh. And these were like these were the clerical robes that he had himself buried in.
Wow!
So you have these like amazingly splendid legends of kings. It was fascinating.
Yeah,
yeah. I'd really love to see a little bit of that sort of less reductive understanding of cultural diversity, sort of in what Tolkien really cared about, the kind of the aesthetics of the world that he inhabited. And I think, and I think that would be fascinating. And of course, Tolkien himself is evoking, Egypt as a parallel for Gondor in terms of aesthetics.
Right. Very much.
I saw some discussion online of, and I might be getting this wrong, but that some Middle Eastern actors had been potentially cast as Numenorians for the Prime series. I'm not sure how valid that information is.
I believe so. Yeah. I'm not sure either, but it seems like it's a very diverse cast based on what we know so far. Yeah.
Yeah. And I saw some speculation emerging from that they might be thinking about or depicting Numenor as a kind of Mediterranean culture in the fullest sense. So as potentially even a kind of Near Eastern influenced culture in terms of the aesthetics too. But I saw some people reacting to that with a little bit of disappointment.
Oh.
Saying things like they'd prefer a kind of Greco-Roman aesthetic to what they termed an Oriental one.
Ooh.
And sort of drawing parallels to the Jackson movies as well. And I wished I could like convey to them somehow that an aesthetic that seems Oriental to them would actually be more accurate to what we know and what Tolkien knew and what he drew in terms of his, the sort of designs from Numenor that we have a few examples.
Right.
That would kind of be more accurate to the Greco-Roman world than what they may be envisioning.
Okay.
Well, I'm reminded of that letter. One of his letters. I can't remember which one, Alan. Do you remember which one it was?
Well, not off the top of my head, probably. But
it's the one where he actually drew the diagram of the crown of Gondor, and he did talk very specifically about the sort of Egyptian influences on Numenor. And I think there's, again, I feel like Amy's really hitting on some aspects of cultural exchange in the ancient world that I think maybe people have not always been that aware of, but Tolkien certainly was. And it seems like leaning into that a bit more would be true to what Tolkien knew of the ancient world.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it would in some ways do him justice in a way that a kind of more reductive depiction would not.
By the way, the letter you're referring to is letter number 211.
I knew you'd find it. Thank you, sir.
He does provide the illustration. It was a letter to Rona Bear, and he specifically says that the Numenorians of Gondor were proud, peculiar, and archaic, and I think are best pictured in, say, Egyptian terms. And then he goes on, as we know, because we talked about this, of course, on the show, the whole idea of the tombs and the ancestry and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, very much that visual of the crown with the wings. He compares that to the crowns of Egypt, the height of the crowns in particular. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, as we're starting to think about wrapping up here, we've talked a little bit about your experience of the work itself, and you've kind of hit on this a little bit with your last answer, so thank you. It's almost like we planned that. But what's been your experience of Tolkien fandom? Have you felt welcomed by Tolkien fandom, marginalized? Do you feel like your opinions, which certainly seem extremely nuanced and well thought out to me, how do you feel that's been received in Tolkien discussion?
Yeah, I would say overall, I've overwhelmingly felt welcomed.
Good.
I've been a Tolkien fan all my life, and this is something that I've really felt part of a community of Tolkien fans, and that's something that was really important to me growing up. Partly, as somebody from a multiracial background, it was important to me to find places of belonging, and the Tolkien fandom was one of those places. And part of that is certainly that message of tolerance, of cooperation, of cultural interactions leading to good things. I've evoked or I've referenced some discussions before that I've maybe wanted to interject a little bit more into, or wanted to be a part of. But overwhelmingly, the majority of interactions I've had have been really, really wonderful. And there are a lot of really amazing, compassionate, tolerant people in this fandom.
Good.
And it's one I'm proud to be a part of.
Pleased to hear that. Well, what can we do here at the Prancing Pony podcast to make sure that voices like yours are heard and continue to be welcomed in the Tolkien community?
I mean, I think a big part of it is precisely things like this, that you're reaching out, to hear the voices of people like me, to kind of promote them and encourage them, and to make sure that your corner of the fandom is a welcoming place for those perspectives. But yeah, I guess overall, for Tolkien fans in general, I would say practice what Tolkien preaches. Listen, talk, understand, disagree, absolutely, but come to interactions from that place of compassionate insight and understanding.
Well, I can't think of a better message for Tolkien fans than that one, Amy. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your insights with us. It's really been a pleasure talking to you. And
thanks for coming. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a real honor. Thank you.
We really appreciate it. Thanks again for coming.
All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and bring out our next guest?
Hi, I'm Stephen Belsky. I'm really glad to be here.
We are glad to have you.
We're glad to have you. Thank you, Stephen. All right. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us where you're from. What do you do? And while you're at it, why don't you tell us how you discovered Tolkien's work in the first place?
So I grew up in and around New York City, but I've lived in Michigan for the last decade or so of my life. I'm a rabbi. I also work as a construction worker.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Cool.
So when I was in third grade, I don't remember if it was for a birthday present or a Hanukkah present, but my parents got me and my brother, we're twins, so we have the same birthday, so it's easy for them. They got us the 4-book set of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
We were very young, but we loved it. And soon afterwards, in the library, we discovered the Silmarillion and the Books of Lost Tales and eventually Unfinished Tales. It was really funny because we were so young that we didn't really understand a lot of what was going on. My brother started reading the Silmarillion and I started reading Book of Lost Tales, and we would literally argue about the differences.
Wow.
Like, they're called the Solus Impi. No, they're called the Teleri.
Oh, that's great. I love that.
It would be many years until we learned about the concept of comparing manuscripts of the same text.
Yeah.
So we literally had no idea what was going on, but we loved it. Couldn't get enough of it. This was in the early 90s, the early days of the internet. So the next step was both of us got involved with Tolkien discussions on Usenet.
Oh, wow.
Usenet. Wow, that is a ways back.
Awesome, yeah.
Yeah. Then, right before high school, I joined Elendormush.
Okay, yeah.
If you remember the age of muds and moos and mucks and all the different acronyms.
I remember that. Yeah, I wasn't into that one. That probably was pretty cool, huh?
It was amazing. Like, I was heavily involved with it, for anyone who doesn't know. So Elendor is a Tolkien Lord of the Rings themed text-based internet role-playing game. It's like Lotro from before the internet invented graphics.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would be like Lotro if everything was made up of ASCII characters, right?
Right, exactly.
I mean, it's really basic graphics in the most simple ways.
Yeah, and so I was really involved with that. That got me deeper into Tolkien and deeper into role-playing games, which have remained a important part of my life since then.
Awesome.
And that's basically it. That started to fade by the sort of the middle of the first decade of the 2000s. And then for a while, I didn't really have much Tolkien in my life until I discovered the Prancing Pony podcast.
Oh, wow.
Okay. That's great.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing me back into it.
Well, we're glad you found us. That's really cool. We're thrilled that you found us.
We really are. I love that story. I remember all those things. I mean, I remember being on Usenet and, bulletin boards on, I don't know, Sierra Online and America Online and all those things, chatting away about Lord of the Rings and things.
Well, and I remember getting emails from you shortly after you had just discovered the podcast. I remember you writing to Barliman to, to say hi and introduce yourself and say you discovered us. And that's really cool to think that was right at the beginning of your reawakening. That's neat.
That really is.
So you said you discovered the books first, and it was pretty early in your life, obviously well before the movies were out. I'm curious, what kind of impact do you think that had? Experiencing Tolkien's words first. What kind of impact do you think that had on how you view the topic of race in Middle-earth?
Well, let me start like this.
Okay.
Growing up as a minority, I was used to the majority of the media I consumed being other people's stories. So when I watched TV or movies or read books, I remember I read Tolkien after reading Narnia and after reading Susan Cooper's The Dark is Rising series. I guess it was sort of the British fantasy canon before Harry Potter started.
Yeah.
Fair enough, yeah.
But it always felt like other people's stories.
Yeah.
It didn't really have much to do with me, and I guess that's sort of the way I approached it just fundamentally. And after all, the professor sub-created his world for like two primary reasons, right? One was as a sandbox for his languages to play in.
Right.
Which I appreciate immensely because I also got into conlanging because of Tolkien.
That's right. Yeah.
And the other reason was to be some kind of epic mythological prehistory for England.
Right.
To like fill in the gaps in his national identity because he didn't have that kind of narrative.
Right.
So I read it as someone else's story. Like I felt fortunate that my ancestors passed down to me a body of lore and law and traditional wisdom that goes all the way back to the Bronze Age. And so when I need to like figure out who I am or what I'm supposed to stand for, like I can refer to that and find out what my cultural values are, what my religious ideals are. And not everyone has that.
Yeah.
So Tolkien didn't have that.
Yeah.
And so I can respect his need to create something that might try to fulfill that need.
Yeah.
And so when I was young, exploring Middle-earth for the first time, I was used to this idea that I have stories that are mine and my people's stories, and other people have their stories that present their cultural values.
Yeah.
Okay.
And their identity. So it didn't really bother me at first that in this mythic, epic narrative set explicitly in, he says, the northwest of the old world, east of the sea. Like, sure, most of the characters, especially the heroes, would be locals, and they would look like locals.
Yeah, right.
And also, in addition to whatever homegrown villains there may be, there would also be adversaries coming from distant lands who may look different in their body or their culture.
Right.
Because it's someone else's story. It's their story. It's not my story. That's how I looked at it.
Okay.
And then, years later, I found out that while I had been relating to the Legendarium as someone else's story, in a sense, I had actually been in the story all along, even though I didn't know it. To quote Tolkien, the dwarves, of course, are quite obviously. Wouldn't you say that in many ways they remind you of the Jews?
I know that interview well. We've brought that in a couple of times.
Yeah. So I discovered that somehow I was there. I was there all along. It's still someone else's story, though, but somehow I'm there.
True.
And it just opened up for me the power of representation, both for good and for bad. So maybe I'll explain this at this point.
Please, yeah.
So I'm obviously Jewish, and specifically I'm Ashkenazi.
Oh, okay.
Which means that my ancestors between ancient Israel and today spent a significant amount of time in Central and or Eastern Europe.
Right.
Yeah.
There's two important things that I just want to mention about Ashkenazi identity. One is that most of the time in the United States and in other parts of the Western world and probably other places around the world, when people think of Jews and Jewishness, they're usually thinking of Ashkenazim specifically.
Okay.
Bagels, Hasidim, Fiddler on the Roof, Yiddish language, literature, and jokes, Jewish delis. Those are all Ashkenazi cultural phenomena.
Oh, okay.
And this is actually a problem that we call Ashkenormativity. Because there's lots of other Jewish cultures that developed in Spain and in Yemen and in Ethiopia and India and Central Asia and all around the Mediterranean and the Middle East that people either ignore or don't know about because, for whatever reason, they've been focused on one subset of greater Jewry.
Right.
The other thing about Ashkenazim, which is, I guess, especially relevant to this topic, is that many Ashkenazim look, quote unquote, white.
Okay. Because of that European heritage?
Yeah.
Okay.
And over the last few years, that especially in the United States of America, there's been this resurgence of awareness around racial issues and inequalities. In the Jewish media and social media, there's been a lot of discussion of what this means, what it means to be provisionally white or functionally white under certain circumstances, or to be white passing. Someone I know who's both Jewish and gay actually said that it's sort of like being in the closet.
Okay.
The idea that you can pass as white, nobody knows, nobody sees anything different. They look at you, they see a white person.
Right. Unless you reveal your identity or they pick up on a hint. And then when that happens, there's the idea of passing always includes this sort of uncertainty, because what are they going to think? Are they going to think something different? Are they going to have a prejudiced or bigoted attitude? It's this anxiety that's built into what looks at the outset like it would be an advantage.
Right.
Like being able to benefit from some of the unfair advantages that are part of the way that our society still treats people who look differently. But at the same time, it's a denial of one's own identity at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
And then the question is, once your identity is revealed, will that change people's attitude?
Right.
The reason I put that all into a big parentheses right now was because I was going to use an Ashkenazi term, which is Yiddish, but it's originally Hebrew, nachas.
Okay.
Nachas means familial pride. It's the feeling that a parent has when their children succeed at something. So when I discovered the power of representation, when I found out that, in a sense, I was in the story all along, that's both really good and really bad, because I can feel nachas, I can feel identification with and pride in Gimli with his very down-to-earth nobility, or the heroism of Azarel, or the diasporan resilience of the exiles from Khazad-dûm.
Oh, great turn of phrase.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love it.
But that's something that can make me feel good to be associated with it.
Right.
But then it's something very different to read about dwarves in The Hobbit being, quote, calculating folk with a great idea of the value of money. Some are tricky and treacherous and pretty bad lots. Some are not, but are decent enough people like Thorin and company if you don't expect too much.
Wow. Yeah.
And then in the earlier material, in the Quenta, in the Lost Tales, it's even worse.
Yeah.
Much worse.
Like the dwarves are literally defined as monsters, Uvanimor.
Yeah.
And described as this mysterious evil race of unknown origin who troubled the people of Earth and were similar to Morgoth's followers, even though they didn't directly serve him. Skilled but greedy, short-bearded adversaries for the gnomes to make war upon. Like, that doesn't feel good.
Right, yeah.
And not only does it not feel good, like, it feels frighteningly familiar.
Yeah.
And so once I was aware of that, it totally changed my experience of reading Tolkien's works. Because I couldn't just say, yeah, this is someone else's story and it's a fantasy story and okay, England, blah, 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 blah. Like the author himself invoked me.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, like, being explicitly identified by the author with a class of characters in his world, it can be gratifying, but it can also be very disturbing. Especially when much of Jewish history really is the effect of other people treating you like a character in their story instead of respecting you as a fellow human being living your own story in your own life.
Yeah. Wow.
That was phenomenal, Stephen. Eye-opening, really. And I know that there's going to be more that you have to say, and I have a feeling you probably have more here as I move on to a different question. You know, we often hear this defense, and this is certainly relevant to the issue you just finished on regarding, Tolkien talking about the dwarves being inspired by the Jews. We often hear that defense that Tolkien was a man of his time. And in some ways, we used that defense in our first episode on the topic. Obviously, just as a fact, everybody is a person of their time. That's just the way things work. But that doesn't mean we can't take a fresh look at Tolkien's work and talk about how it resonates with people in our time. And of course, we know that Tolkien said some appropriately harsh words about the Nazis in his letters, as we would hope, and also acknowledging injustices in South Africa. But some have suggested that these are low bars to clear, and that his writing still reveals some prejudices that were common to people in the early 20th century. What's your take on this?
So I actually think he's a pretty good model. I get the impression that his heart was in the right place, and I find it really impressive that through the example of his treatment of the dwarves in his legendarium, like he showed that people can change, people can learn. I mean, the sensitivities that many of us have today that make us recoil from some of his usage of words, and that sensitivity developed partially due to the times that he was living in.
Right.
And
True.
Like there's the saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? But the great thing about people is that human beings aren't dogs.
Well said.
Very well said. I love
it.
this.
Thank you. So like human beings learn and grow. And so it really seems like at some point he realized that the folkloric sources that he was drawing inspiration from were contaminating his world with anti-Semitic caricatures. And so over a long time, he worked at it to purge the dwarves of anti-Jewish stereotypes and replace those with possibly some actual cultural reflections inspired by the Jewish experience. Not every Jewish person who reads through the Legendarium is satisfied with how the Khazad ended up. But I don't think anyone could deny the incredible amount of progress that Tolkien's image of what dwarves are like went through.
Yeah.
I just recently saw in, I don't remember which volume it is of History of Middle-earth. It has to be one of the first 5, because I don't actually have the ones after that. But at a certain point, Christopher Tolkien quotes these early sources that sound like they're reflecting anti-Semitic European folkloric images of what a dwarf would be. And then he says, you know what? This is what it means in the appendices to Lord of the Rings when it says that the tales of men have claimed that dwarves worked on the side of evil, but it's not true.
That's right.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. He's reading his father's work as the author, not just trying to cleanse his world of negative cultural baggage, but to actually say that his own early work was wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
That makes me very hopeful for the human capacity to learn and grow and become more sensitive to others.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that is a great catch, a great insight.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned Tolkien's comments in his letters about Nazis.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just love and admire his willingness to skewer the absurdity of Nazism to its face.
Yeah.
And this isn't even about my people. Like the Nazis had other victims who they also tried to eradicate.
True.
Yeah.
And I don't know who else would have had the scholarship, the chutzpah, and the way with words to respond to a demand for Aryan credentials by pointing out that the Romani people, who the Nazis hated so much and tried to destroy, were actually more legitimately, quote-unquote, Aryan in the linguistic sense than the German Nazis could ever be. Like that's impressive.
That really is. You're right.
That's like how a philologist would respond. You know, it's such a schooling from the philologist.
It really is, and it's a wonderful schooling at that.
Yeah.
Moving on, is there something that you wish? And I suspect the answer is yes, but I want to maybe get some specifics. Is there anything that you wish Tolkien had done differently in his work, particularly in regards to his treatment of race? And how would that have maybe impacted the story had he done that?
Okay, so this isn't about dwarves anymore.
Okay.
I feel like I've talked enough about that and what he did do to improve that aspect of his work. But I do wish that he would have done something differently in terms of how he described enemy monstrous creatures like orcs and trolls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of my other favorite authors is David Brin, who's a scientist and a science fiction author. And one of his novels is called Kiln People, Kiln, like
firing something up in a kiln.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
And so Kiln People is it's a sci-fi noir detective story about murder and mass-produced golem technology.
Okay.
And so in that story, golems can be made any color you can imagine, except for what he calls the 10,000 shades of authentic human brown. So there's always a clear distinction between the human in all our variety and the non-human.
Right.
So I think that some of the alienation that contemporary readers can feel for some of the professor's descriptions could have been avoided if he described orcs and trolls using more explicitly monstrous adjectives instead of ones that have also been used to describe human beings in real life. Especially for people who have had those descriptions applied to them.
Yeah.
Just avoiding that totally and making clear that monsters are monsters. That could have helped. I don't think it would have impacted the story at all, but what's important is that it would have not impacted the reader.
Wow. Yeah. I think that's really well said. I guess, with that in mind, having talked about what Tolkien did and did not do himself, what would you like to see future adaptations of Tolkien do differently? Now, of course, this includes partly the Amazon series, because that's the next one on everybody's mind, but you don't have to limit it to that. What would you like to see future movies do differently, or any future adaptation?
Well, I think it would be good if future adaptations tended towards a greater range of representation rather than strictly adhering to the text descriptions of what the quote-unquote featured ethnic groups of Middle-earth look like. Like I really appreciated in Peter Jackson's Hobbit movies. There were certain things that I didn't appreciate in them, but I did appreciate how he was able to include a more diverse picture of humanity in a way that also didn't feel like it contradicted the image presented by the book. Because, at least from the way I look at it, if you needed to pick one location we see in the books to be a diverse, multicultural community, Lake Town is a wonderful choice.
Right.
Yeah, it's right there, out on the edge of the map. It's a trading center between the dwarves and Dale and Amon Thranduil and all the varied humans and Rovanian and Rune out there in the southeast, just falling off the map however far it goes. So it makes sense that anyone from anywhere could be there. And so I'm glad that that he took that opportunity to show us that view of Esgaroth.
Yeah.
So similarly, I sort of got lost from TV in this new century. I remember in the 90s, turning the dial or maybe pushing buttons on a cable box. I really don't understand any of these streaming services. I haven't been able to get into it.
Yeah.
But from what I've heard and read, if the Amazon series is focusing on the Numenorians, remember, I first read this when I was very young, and some of the mispronunciations stuck.
That's all right.
So I still call them Numenorians. I still sometimes call Rivendell Imlandris with a weird N in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. I still sometimes call it Taniquetl.
Right.
So, how long have you been doing this, man?
Yeah, far too long.
So if the Amazon series is focusing on the Numenorians in the Second Age, then that's also a perfect opportunity to show a view of Middle-earth that's more inclusive than a shallow glance might assume. Because, they explored all the seas. They interacted with whatever human culture or Avaran culture or Dwarven culture might be anywhere in Arda, they could be there. And so it'd be super easy to justify, quote unquote, featuring characters who look like anyone from anywhere.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, not everyone has to look like the Three Houses of the Dain, even if you throw in the Druchel, who I'm like a really big fan of.
Yeah.
But like, it could be so much more than that. So I think that would be nice.
Yeah.
That would.
That's one thing I'm really excited about with the series. I mean, I have my fears, I have my doubts, but I also have my hopes. And one of my hopes is that we'll really see a very diverse Numenor, not just in the way the people look, but just in the way the world looks. I mean, the cultural markers that they use to, kind of code the culture. I would love to see some ancient Egyptian looking stuff. I would love to see just like all kinds of like bright colors. And I don't know, I could see Numenor being really exciting.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that's something I'm looking forward to.
Yeah. Hopefully I figure out how to watch it.
Well, Stephen, now that we've talked about your experience of the work itself, what's been your experience of the Tolkien fandom? We've had folks talk about this, about being welcomed or feeling marginalized. And, you kind of touched on something earlier that might be relevant in the fact that you don't appear to be of a marginalized group or of a different group, a different culture. What's your take on that? Have you experienced anything in the fandom that our listeners should be aware of?
So I've mostly had good experiences. Like, I really don't remember any problems coming up in my early days on Usenet and Elendor, although that was 20, 25 years ago now. So
True.
I could have forgotten. Yeah. And since then, there's this big gap in my involvement in anything that could be Tolkien fandom. But I did have one incident a little under a year ago, posted in a Facebook group, the lyrics to a parody of a contemporary Israeli dance song that I had reworked into a song about Eowyn and the Battle of the Pelennor Fields.
Okay.
It was in Hebrew, so I didn't expect much response, but I was hoping that some other Hebrew-speaking Tolkien fan would appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, instead, I got an anti-Semitic comment from some jerk with Morgul in his name.
Oh.
Of course. Yeah.
Like, really? Right, of course. Fortunately, one of the mods of the group was a certain Lord of the Mark who took care of it.
I thought this story sounded familiar. Yeah.
I was wondering which group this was, and now I know. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the only incident that I've had, but I don't know, being Jewish on the internet is a constant low-level anxiety kind of situation.
Mm.
You just never know when you're out there in not the quote-unquote real world, but the virtual world, where people feel much freer to spout whatever kind of hate they're feeling at the moment. You just never know if some innocent comment is going to get a hostile response. So, I mean, that's the only incident that I've experienced recently, but it's just part of life.
Yeah.
I mean, you get used to it.
Wow.
And it's like, and I'm simultaneously like, yeah, I guess it is. And yeah, what a horrible world we live in.
Right. Exactly. I guess you get used to it, but boy, you shouldn't have to,
Right. Yeah, I know.
That's
right.
Yeah. Well, I guess really along those lines, what can we do, or other people who have platforms like this in the Tolkien community, to make sure that voices like yours are heard and welcomed?
I think the only thing I can think of is just encouraging people and reminding them to always be sensitive and recognize that other people out there have struggles that you may not know about. Mm-hmm. And I think that the example of Professor Tolkien's changing development of what dwarves are like is a really great example to point to show that it's important not only to try to improve the primary world, but also to be willing to look inside yourself and your own imagined internal worlds and make sure that those two live up to the highest ideals.
Yeah.
I like that.
I think that's a wonderful place to end. And
I think it is.
And just a powerful lesson for everyone listening. And I hope they hear it and I hope they appreciate it. I know I do.
I do too. Stephen, thank you very, very much for joining us today. We are really grateful for your perspective and just for your time for joining us. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. It's been great talking with you, and I really appreciate this opportunity.
We appreciate you joining us. As Alan said, it's just been just a great time, and we've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Been eye-opening. Thank you very much. And now we'd like to introduce our last guest this evening. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a Tolkien fan.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a fan of the Prancing Pony podcast, of course, and
Good.
Thank you.
And I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you.
We're super thrilled to have you here, and thank you so much for saying you're a fan of the Prancing Pony podcast. That
does mean a lot.
That makes us feel good.
Well,
never hurts.
It's true.
Thank you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I'm very mixed in terms of race and background. I am Hispanic. I'm also a few other things.
Mm-hmm.
One of which definitely gets me. I've faced a lot of racism in my life, a little more than it seems reasonable to me. But I'm assuming that's most people's position on that.
Well, since racism is inherently not reasonable,
exactly.
Any amount that you encounter is therefore by default unreasonable.
That's a fair point.
Seems disproportionate, but here we are.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about when you first discovered Tolkien's work? Maybe how old were you, and did you read the books first? Did you see the movies first? That sort of thing.
I was actually a bit older. I was in my, well, this will give it away, but I was in my mid-20s.
Mm-hmm.
And I had married a Tolkien fanatic. We had a Tolkien shelf when we met.
Oh, wow.
So
right on.
It was built in. And I just never would read the books, partly because I'm a bit obsessed with trees. And I've always written little stories about trees. And everyone always said, well, that's just like Lord of the Rings. So,
wow. Okay.
So I sort of didn't read them until the first movie came out, and right after the first movie came out, I just plowed right into Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
cool.
And that is how I got into Lord of the Rings. So that was 2001. That was December of 2001.
Yes, it was.
So it started with the movies. You kind of came to the books with sort of that picture of Middle Earth in your head, I imagine, somewhat, or do you feel like Tolkien's words kind of this is always a question I ask people who watch the movies first, because I read the books first. Do you feel like Peter Jackson's vision really had an impact on how you see Middle Earth in general? Or do you feel like once you read the books, you're like, oh, wait, no, this is it. This is a totally different Middle Earth than what I saw on screen.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I don't know. Especially if I see them now, that isn't how I envision pretty much anything. And I just watch them a bit for reference. There are a few things that have come up in this discussion about, race with the man at Bree with the I forget how his eyes are described exactly, but I do picture the actor in the movie for that, oddly enough.
Didn't play a very large part either. You're talking about the Southerner.
And he's just very, but he's racially basically the same as everybody else. So
he's the squint-eyed Southerner.
Right? Yes.
Right.
But otherwise, I really don't picture a lot of it, no.
Okay.
I was probably one of the few people, I was actually familiar with Tolkien due to references in Old English books and Beowulf.
Ah, okay.
Chickering's Dual Edition Beowulf has some exercises written by Tolkien.
Oh, wow.
So
you've gone into the deep end with that stuff.
Well, that's seriously.
He was the guy from the Beowulf studies. So
okay,
right.
I think I'm the only person who did that way around.
Very cool. Well, I guess just to kind of jump into our discussion here. You talk about how you started with the movies, then moved on to the books. Do you feel like that had an impact, or I guess what kind of impact do you think that may have had on how you view the topic of race in Middle Earth, which, of course, is what we're here to talk about today?
Right.
There was quite a bit of discussion at the time because of 9/11 and then the film coming out. And then for basically the next year, I think there was a lot of discussion about how, and this was by the filmmaker, the film team as well.
Yeah.
Trying to explain why they, we would say now, coded certain groups as being more Middle Eastern. I look at the films now and I see them as sort of a hodgepodge of every other thing that you can put on an extra, basically. But it is definitely all the other things. are basically thrown in at that. But there was a lot of discussion about this, and there's the war on terror, and all of that was ramping up. There was a lot of discussion of the Middle East, of Islam, and I remember there being a foreword in one of the books that came out with the Two Towers, I believe it was. I'm pretty sure, by Viggo Mortensen, about resisting racism and Islamophobia and hoping for peace.
Yeah.
And so this was very much something that was discussed at the time. So I think I was just very aware of it being there.
Okay.
One of the first things I did notice, and this was actually my first experience with any of this, and I didn't even mean anything by it, but after seeing the film, because there's a lot of close-ups in Fellowship of the Ring.
Yes.
A lot of close-ups. And I just made the comment that there were so many sets of blue eyes in that movie. And I happened to say this to some people who had been fans of the books for like years and years. These were people who were pointing out little inaccuracies in the movie, like with, their fists up in the air. And they all turned around at me like I was trying to pull one on them. They're like, all right, don't you start doing that. Don't start throwing that stuff in here where it does, and I was like, hey, I just was making a comment. There were just really a lot of blue eyes. That's all I meant.
I mean, that seems like a perfect example of, if I can just kind of jump in, it seems like a perfect example of kind of what we're looking for here is like how, your experience being very different from a lot of fans and the idea that some fans kind of come to it like, oh, well, this is the way it is, because of their personal experience, but you come to it from a different place, from a different background, and you have a different experience of the work. And it's very interesting. And it's fascinating to me to hear you say that about the movies, especially because of course with the movies you can't hide it. Like the movies, it's all on the screen. You can see the actors.
We talk about those blink and you miss it moments in the texts.
Yeah,
but there are no such things in the films.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I mean that was an uncomfortable couple of months, even if you're not like I am not Muslim, but it was an uncomfortable few months really that made you very aware racially. But I didn't. There was also I had none of the book purism. I hadn't read it yet, so it wasn't
with
there.
The movie first,
right. So everything was completely new to me, and the only thing I really remember with early readings of the books, it wasn't race. It was having that much information come at you all at once.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a fire hose for sure.
It's like rereading the Council of Elrond chapter like 5 times just to
just to keep track of who's talking and telling you what, right?
Who was that? The firstborn increase and the what? No, wait, and then Gandalf's entire rundown to Frodo. I mean, this is a lot of information. You're not going to get all of that in one reading. So no, I wasn't thinking anything to do with race reading the books. I was kind of jumping up and down over the Old English references.
Of course, I'm sure that's
awesome.
Thrilling. Yeah,
that is awesome.
So we often hear the defense that Tolkien was a man of his time when it comes to this issue of race. Obviously, everyone is a person of their time. That's how time works. But that doesn't mean we can't take a fresh look at Tolkien's work and talk about how it resonates with the people in our time. Now, we know that Tolkien said some appropriately harsh words about the Nazis in his letters and also acknowledged the injustices in South Africa. But some have suggested that, look, these are relatively low bars to clear, and his writing still reveals some prejudices that were common to people in the early 20th century. What's your take on this? Based on his writing, including his letters or anything else you're familiar with, how do you think Tolkien measures up to others of his time in regards to racial tolerance?
Yeah, I think that Tolkien was just a man of his time and also a man slightly out of his time. He always had one foot in a different world. And it's a world that I've spent a lot of time reading about in terms of Northern mythologies and poetry.
Right.
So a lot of the things he says that, doesn't really bowl me over as blatantly, horribly racist. And compared to writers of his time, there's so much. Everybody brings up H.P. Lovecraft, and I don't think H.P. Lovecraft is it. Of course, H.P. Lovecraft is very, very, very racist.
Yeah.
You go into the letters of H.P. Lovecraft. Okay, well, have you ever gone into the letters of Margaret Mitchell or her only real hit novel? It's explicitly racist. There's no way to get around that. Even writers like Agatha Christie, you have these little asides where I remember in Death on the Nile, she's referring constantly to the character of Jackie. The narrator is constantly referring to her as having hot Latin blood. She's French.
Oh my goodness.
So if you want to talk about how people saw race at a certain time, well, Tolkien's talking about dwarves and hobbits and elves.
Right.
And orcs. And his prejudices of that time are going to come through. I think also to a different discussion I've seen, there were some things that were social coding that I think get lost.
Yeah. Good point.
They're not necessarily racial.
That's fair.
Yeah, I suppose you could probably look at things like the relationship of Frodo and Sam, right? I mean, there's so much social coding in that relationship, right?
True.
And we can talk about it as, it's kind of like an officer and a Batman. And we can kind of get past it through that. But also there's just a very master-servant relationship there, isn't there?
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier the prejudices that do exist. Do you have any advice or any counsel for our listeners on how to come to terms with those existing prejudices and to be able to continue to appreciate the work for what it is?
I would say to definitely just study them, read more. Tolkien provides so much opportunity to dig in to ancient sources. And I know a lot of fans do this, but read them. Personally, I'm disabled. I've seen a lot of discussion lately over how it's horrible that Frodo has to sail into the West at the end, that it's giving a horrible message to disabled people. I don't see it that way, but also there are parallels in mythology. In the Kalevala, there are a ton of parallels. And I would say to read more from that time period, and also just examine it, critique it if you need to.
Yeah.
And also I would say take the story overall, and I'm here talking about Lord of the Rings specifically, but take it overall for what it is and for the themes. Tolkien said myriad times that it's about death and mortality and fading. And there's barely a paragraph in the book that doesn't at least work this theme in.
True, yeah.
So don't throw that baby out with the bathwater just because there's some stuff that is a little... Stick with the theme. Tolkien wrote an entire, very persuasive essay and series of lectures on the theme of sticking to the theme and not tearing down the entirety of everything solely to pick apart little aspects here and there and make the work into something that it's not through deconstruction. And that's the advice that I honestly would give, is to just appreciate the art for what it is.
I like that, using Tolkien's own Beowulf analogy.
The monsters and the critics.
Exactly. Right, the monsters and the critics analogy about the
whole tower allegory,
To say, don't take this tower down to try to inspect the stones that make it up too closely. You can see the sea if you climb to the top of this tower.
Right.
Yeah.
From the top of this tower, I could look out upon the sea. And
for a lot of us, this is a work that very, very, very deeply, it resonates in that exact way.
Mm-hmm.
It is about death and grief and loss, and it is a comfort that people turn to in those times.
Yeah. It reminds me of I think this was on Fairy Stories, was it, Alan, where Tolkien talks about universal truths, like, looking for universal truth. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm struck by when you're talking, is there are some things there that absolutely do resonate, no matter who you are, no matter where you come from. And I like to think that's what Tolkien was trying to do, that he was trying to come out with a message that would resonate with lots of different people, more so than anything that would ever seek to divide people. I don't think that was his intention. But again, I mean, I think in the interest of kind of understanding different people's perspectives on this, the way different people receive the work, I mean, I guess some people are going to see those things, and I think it's worth talking about.
Maybe on the universal theme, yeah. I mean, he did. There's a reason that Lord of the Rings is popular the world over, and not just Lord of the Rings, but the rest of his works. It's not because he invented different races. Although
I'm not as familiar with the world of gaming, and I understand that there are some serious concerns there, and I certainly wouldn't want to talk over people who have those concerns. But
yeah.
From some of his notes, a quote: "If we like to forget the encircling foe and its ultimate victory in the temporal order, he did not forget it. He was on a besieged island and knew it, but he loved the island all the more."
I love that.
That's a line he took out. He in his finished final Beowulf, the Monsters and the Critics. That's not there, but it's paraphrased in the Grey Havens.
Yeah.
In the mouth of Sam. Frodo to Sam.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's a universal theme. And so I would say we've had a tremendous year of grief and loss and suffering. And this is a balm. Not to downplay anybody who has concerns or has brought up concerns.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm spending a lot of my time discussing race and racial inequality in other circles.
Yeah.
But it can, I think it can be a little poorly aimed when the criticisms are coming from people who are not marginalized people or from marginalized groups.
That's
well,
fair.
And I appreciate you saying that, because one of the things that I think must speak for both myself and Alan is, we don't want to be seen. We don't want to talk over anybody else, right?
No.
Not just we don't want to be seen as talking over anybody else. We don't want to talk over anybody else. We want people to have their concerns heard. And if people are seeing content in Tolkien that makes them uncomfortable, that makes them feel marginalized, that resonates with hateful language that they've heard or things they've experienced in their life, we want them to be able to talk about that. But it is. I think it's also important to talk about the good that's there, right?
Yes.
And the universal truths that are there, which I think is what Tolkien was trying to do, I think. And so I'm glad to hear you bring that out. I think that segues into a question that I've got here about, I think Alan and I often talk about Tolkien's message being one of togetherness. I mean, I think even in our previous episode on race, we talked, maybe a little bit too lightly about the idea that you've got different races and cultures. You've got elves and men and dwarves, hobbits, ents, whatever. They're all coming together to fight this common enemy. And we felt, well, of course, look at all these different races coming together. This is diversity. And maybe we were a little bit glib with that, but
certainly not intentionally, but
not intentional. No, I think it's just the reality is, we see the world through our own lens, and there are other interpretations out there. And, there are some who have argued that despite this message of togetherness, which is there on the surface, that maybe there is still some othering going on. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that other types of othering that might be showing up in the story that maybe we haven't talked about before.
Yes, I think that the theme of everybody comes together is, well, the way you phrased it sounds a little uncomfortable.
Okay, fair enough. That's possible.
That sounds like, see, he put in diversity because they're different.
Yeah. Well, I think we did say that in the previous episode, and I think, frankly, it was just a huge blind spot for us. And I'm here to admit that, frankly.
Yeah.
It was a blind spot for us. I think we were too glib about it. And frankly, I'm surprised we didn't get more criticism for it, honestly. Please tell us, tell us what we.
There's a lot of room, though, for being a little bit more humorous about it, though, in a way, too. Yes, there's a lot of othering going on. It's a travel story. How is Tolkien supposed to describe everybody they come into contact with? Was he supposed to give the hobbits smartphones so that they could Wikipedia what people in Gondor look like, or the Ents? And I think that there's a lot. I take this actually way too personally in real life, the othering. As we were saying, I have a hard time sometimes even going to the grocery store. If I have to wear a scarf, I've actually had to have my spouse defend me because of the people coming in to, why are you, I'm obviously not in hijab. I'm not Muslim, but that's not how people read that. So othering is something that I've experienced since. It's honestly one of my earliest memories in life is my grandfather and his accented English having to yell to people, "She's American." Because again, I don't know what it is about my face, but it screams to people with my mouth closed that she's other. And then they comment on it. So this is something I have a lifelong experience with. And I've gotten sensitive to it. But at the same time, I think, like my father wasn't sensitive to it. He just took this in stride. And actually, that's a little how Pippin takes it. I think Pippin's a good example. He gets to Gondor, every single person there. What are you?
Right.
You're basically the Middle Earth version of where are you from?
Right.
and Pippin's like, well, I'm a hobbit. I'm from the Shire, and here I'm going to tell you about it. And he knows who he is. He's not trying to be a man or a Gondor. He's wearing the uniform, but he still knows. He knows who he is.
Yeah.
And that is a very good way to deal with those sort of things. And an example of when you have a community, a strong community and a strong fellowship. I think that actually is really one of the big lessons, is that having the strong fellowship and friends. I find that there's a lot of othering in discussing race generally. There's a lot of pressure that puts on people who are from marginalized groups across the board. And sadly, I tick too many boxes here. Racially, gender, I'm not going to lie, gender and Tolkien is still a very uncomfortable sort of subject. But again, if it were more comfortable, I would not have a Tolkien shelf.
That's fair.
I would throw that out. If I found Tolkien's work offensive, I would throw this out. That is not how I feel. I find great solace and comfort in Tolkien's work and his philosophy.
So, is there something that you wish Tolkien had done differently in his work, particularly in regards to his treatment of race? I know it's kind of a what-if question, but it's one that I think will be really interesting to talk about.
Yeah.
And if so, how do you think it would have impacted the story?
I think the Woses are unfortunate. Make no mention of them. Flee them. Take Gilder's advice. Just cut them out. I really don't even think that would truly affect the story that much.
No.
I think that is a very, very obvious. That is the ultimate man of his time instance of shoehorning in every single stereotype of the noble savage trope.
Yeah.
The dialogue doesn't even seem original, and it doesn't stack up to his other characters that he created, such as the Ents.
Yeah.
So I would say, there's stuff that I wish he had. I mean, everybody wishes, and people will wish that certain language was not in things that are written right now, in about 20 years.
Good point.
That's a very good point.
Oh no. So, I think that you could nitpick that to death. Again, it's a tower.
Yeah. But you're saying it could do without that one particular stone of the Woses.
Yeah, I am taking that one stone.
Not wrong.
To the extent that it doesn't do that much for the story.
Right.
And,
you're right. That's a good point.
And I remember even, like reading like Dimitra Fimi talking about, that idea of the noble savage. And I haven't reread that part in a few years now. And I'm really, I'm both interested and kind of terrified.
And dreading it. Yeah. I'm dreading the Tonto-esque language that he speaks.
I did it last night, and it was almost like you were just reading. It's like you step outside of Lord of the Rings.
A little bit.
Other than Mary sitting there making his observations, it's like, who wrote this dialogue? My goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, this is every single one of these.
That is going to be painful when we get there, Shawn.
I think it is.
Skip it.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know if we can do that.
Take that brick out of the tower.
We got to do the Prancing Pony podcast treatment. So
we'll probably not do a lot of the actual talking.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that.
I don't think I want to actually do any of much at least of Gonberry Gon's
actual dialogue.
Don't.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
But you mentioned how that's sort of kind of the ultimate man of his time thing, right? I mean, that was just such a trope, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In a lot of the literature he would have grown up reading.
That was something that, and the thing about the noble savage trope is people, when they included it, they were trying to be very charitable.
Sure.
They were actually, that was sort of a older version of being what they call today in air quotes woke. As horrifying as that sounds to modern ears, that's actually the perception.
Just cringe, but you're right.
Yeah.
It really was. If you hear people talk, I hate to pick on certain movies, but there are certain movies featuring Native Americans, indigenous people, where this is also the case, and they're now seen as fairly cringeworthy. But at their time, they were trying to make a commentary on And it doesn't work in either case.
No.
It's never comfortable.
Yeah.
As for the rest of it, nobody wants to hear certain remarks. And I mean, let's be very honest. This is a world. He's created a world where all the bad guys that are humans look like me and my family. Part of me and my family. Then there's like this one little sliver of my family who are all pretty good. That's weird. But I don't really see it as, if that makes any sense. That's very easy to separate for me. I wouldn't expect much otherwise. In terms of, and from a large, expansive fantasy fiction that needs to create a world that's roughly based on Europe, where the Shire is located where it's at.
Yeah.
I just sort of, it's there. I've read a lot of the criticisms of how this has impacted fantasy as a genre, but also gaming and these other areas. And that's not something I've delved into outside. I stick pretty much with Tolkien. So those criticisms I'm always interested in hearing more of. And certainly not trying to talk over any of those criticisms. I'm just not familiar with them.
Nor are we, and certainly we can't speak to those.
Me either. I've seen a little bit of it just because I'm starting to get a little bit back into D&D and not actually playing, but just starting to read the books again. And I'm seeing conversations like that too. I understand there's a lot that's being done to kind of change D&D, but I'm not at all prepared to talk about it at all. Just,
no.
I'm not close enough to it. That's actually a really good segue to my next question. It's almost like we planned this.
Almost.
With all that said about, the what ifs of what Tolkien, did or didn't do, what would you like to see future adaptations of Tolkien do differently? And, I'm thinking partly of the Amazon series here, but not necessarily just
in case
Amazon
they'll
series.
listen to your advice.
Yeah.
This will sound horrible coming from somebody who discovered the books through the movies. Well, sort of, through my spouse and Beowulf.
Yeah.
But, I don't want there to be further adaptations. I find that they go terribly awry when it comes to Lord of the Rings has a lot of dialogue. Tolkien wrote a lot of dialogue. You could just lift it and stick it right in the movie, right in the script. The Silmarillion does not. We already saw what happened with The Hobbit, which also does not. So I think no matter what they do, they're on thin ice already. And
good point.
Also, what are they basing this on? We don't know anything about the Amazon series, but it's an uncomfortable thing no matter what, because if you put a bunch of people in there to try and force a diversity, I don't know. That leaves you with some really uncomfortable things going on.
It's fair. So you'd rather see no future adaptation?
Yeah, just leave it, cut everything and leave it.
There you go.
I just rather see. I've seen this happen with too many other works where they do a very poor job of writing because they don't adapt it properly, but then they try to put a diverse cast and then everyone gets blamed. And frankly, this is a sort of activism that makes people who are white, let's be honest,
let's be clear.
in America and in Britain, this makes people like that feel like they're doing something. And when everybody gets mad, they don't get mad typically at those people who make the production. That sort of activism lands on marginalized groups every time.
Huh.
Interesting.
Every single time. And when I've seen this happen for so long, and that never goes well for the marginalized groups in question. So,
okay.
When they made that Troy Fall of a City.
I don't think I saw that one.
Oh, just don't. It's possibly the
last Troy movie I saw was Brad Pitt as Achilles.
Oh, wow.
That's what I'm saying. It has that as competition, and it's still worse. People, when it was released, it was released in Britain first, in the UK first, and I was following the tweets, and people were saying, I can't wait till it's over so they'll talk about Brexit again. That's how bad.
Wow.
It's just boring. It's so boring. But what they did was they made a diverse cast be in there. So Achilles is a bald black actor who's really good. He's the only interesting thing in the whole mini-series, and it's a mini-series based on Troy and partially the Iliad. It's of course, it's the whole mishmash. And I think as a few of the gods were also black. And so there's just this reaction on the internet, whereas you either like it and you're a good person, or you hate it and you're racist. And then everybody else who's just like, it was boring. It was just bad.
How about hating it for the actual content rather than
Yeah, it just sucked.
Yeah. That's a fair concern about the Amazon series. You're right, because if you come out, if it is, let's say, mediocre, and we criticize it as being mediocre, but it has a diverse cast,
then
how are we viewed? Then we're viewed as racist because we're criticizing a show that has a diverse cast, even if we're just criticizing the content.
Right.
Wow. And if the worst content is in the hands of an actor who's playing a completely fictional character who's played by a person who's not white, that's like if they gave they did give all the worst stuff to Tariel, really.
Yeah.
True. I mean,
yes, that is quite true. They did give the worst stuff to Tariel, in all fairness to her. Yeah. And lastly, we just want to ask about your experience with the fandom. We've talked about your experience of the work, but in dealing with this issue of race in Tolkien, what's been your experience with the fandom itself, the Tolkien community?
Well, I have always actually found the Tolkien community to be very welcoming. Mm-hmm. And I sort of live on nerd jokes and nerd facts. And it's the internet.
Yeah.
I'm from the generation where we first were able to have these discussions, and we were a lot more anonymous. It was a great place to be anonymous.
True.
And be judged for, our content, what we were putting out there, and not all the stuff we'd be judged for in real life. So, and I do want to mention this, that one of the things is being a non-Christian. That's one thing that sort of it doesn't make me feel marginalized. It's just, I don't have anything to say in certain discussions.
Well, sure. That's fair.
Sure. Yeah.
That's fine. There's just, and D&D jokes. I don't play D&D either. So there's some stuff that I just don't, I don't have anything to contribute on, but otherwise I find the fandom to be very welcoming. And I'm very, very sorry. It makes me feel terrible that other people have not felt well.
Yeah.
But there is another aspect of othering that I think we need to discuss, and we need to address privilege in the Tolkien fandom in this arena, particularly, especially in this last year.
Okay.
Where so many people are grieving already and in very bad positions. We are in a pandemic. We are losing family members.
Yeah.
But there is the othering that ensues when people who are privileged and in the majority, in other words, in most of these discussions, they're white, within the fandom, who insist on bringing up race and they insist that we discuss race and racism. It unfairly throws a light on every marginalized person that's there. Your jaw clenches. You automatically just go, oh my gosh, all of the trauma I have experienced, every racial slur I have been called, and all of that is just, there is something so visceral in that, that we frequently remain silent, as some of this lived experience that we have is traumatic to recount. And it really only serves the interests of more privileged people in the group who kind of want, it's commonly called trauma porn. I feel uncomfortable with that term in a way, but it's a very othering thing. And as a lot of us have sought out these places to, be fairly anonymous, not have these qualifiers. And that leads to another related subject, is that we've got an epidemic, in a way, of people who are coming from a place of privilege and usually white. And I am in no way trying to talk over anybody who has felt harmed by the text or harmed by the fandom or harmed in any who's from a marginalized group and has had those experiences. But there is a certain aspect here that we really do need to discuss, of privileged people who are white, who are insisting that we talk about race and lecturing people in the fandom on what constitutes racism, anti-racism, and racism in Tolkien, or just flat out insisting that he was racist.
Okay.
We know what's racist, and everybody has a different view. All these groups we're not monoliths, but we absolutely, this is the definition of white supremacy, in the form of systemic racism, is to have people insist that we discuss racist elements in Tolkien's work when a variety of people of color, as the phrase goes, I don't use that as much, but people from marginalized groups have, for the last several years, have been asking people to stop. We frequently get shouted down, and this is usually being done by white people. So I don't see what purpose it serves to keep insisting when it makes people uncomfortable. Yes, there's a very self-serving quality to some of this discourse. And I've likened it in more polite terms to, which I also feel very, very heartfelt, to tearing down the tower in Tolkien's Tower allegory, because I believe his works are, they're art with a theme. This is somewhere that you can walk through this tower. These are rooms in which I spent all of last year reading I Sit Beside the Fire and Think to my mother-in-law, who was the dearest person on the planet to me. Every day after she declined following several strokes, I read that to her every single day.
Wow. That
That is part of my Tolkien experience. That is part of my interaction with the text. I don't need to deconstruct it. That is a much deeper place to experience the text. And of course, we weren't able to see her after March, and I read that to her for the last time on FaceTime in September, and she passed away that night. And
oh my gosh.
so when I talk about the tower and how I walk around in those rooms, my father, he was also introduced to Lord of the Rings through the movies, and absolutely loved the films, but he didn't read the books. And he was struck very suddenly with a brainstem tumor. It was brain cancer. And we never talked about it. We never talked about his impending death, which is what it was.
Right.
Except for the one time he finally looked up at me towards the end and asked me what happens to Frodo and what happens to Aragorn. And this was literally the only conversation I had with my father about his death, was telling him that Frodo gets to sail away to be healed. And this was the last conversation I had, the only conversation I had with my father about him dying, is linked inexplicably to Tolkien. And he passed away because this was September, edging up on September of 2003. He died during that month. And the Return of the King came out in December of that year. And so he knew he wasn't going to get to see it. And this was his only way he really acknowledged that. And so I had to tell him the end. I had to tell him what happened. And you better believe that when the movie came out, I was bawling my eyes out when when Gandalf had to describe death, and that beautiful scene there where those words get put into Gandalf's mouth. And that's all I wanted, was for that curtain to peel back and see my dad again. So this is my tower, and this is my theme. And it very much it's very much a part of how I experience this. And I've absolutely am not criticizing anybody who felt injured by anything in the fandom or the text or any other areas like fan fiction and those sides of the fandom.
Right.
I would never want to. And I cried equally at some statements in a Oxenmoot piece where somebody else felt horrible by something that was said, by Tolkien. I would never want to, but there is an element here where we have, I've even heard the phrase problematic POC, problematic people of color, mentioned several times. It's unacceptable. Seriously? Yes, it is unacceptable to have, and the people who've said this have qualified themselves as being white online. There is no reason in the fandom to have people who are privileged and white going around and labeling people who disagree with their view of racism and other isms in Tolkien as being problematic.
No.
Yeah.
And I think that everyone can agree that that is what makes the fandom potentially unwelcoming.
Well, it certainly would.
Wow.
I have plenty to say on Tolkien, obviously, that has nothing to do with race.
Yeah.
And I would very much like to be able to discuss those things. These are all pleasant things that take take me away from the troubles of life and from, frankly, the traumas I've experienced that have stemmed directly from very racist incidents against me in my life. And so no, I don't want to be lectured on by people of privilege, people who are white, people who are some in academia, telling me what I need to believe and giving me a reading list. There's an insinuation there that we are all, if we don't agree, we're just unenlightened and uncouth and uneducated. And I think we can see where that's going in terms of being racist.
Yeah.
It's a very condescending form of racism that I don't tolerate.
Good.
I had to speak out on this a few times, and I was treated very rudely by the people who were engaging in this behavior and insisting on inclusion in the fandom. I was told that I needed to
of your thoughts,
go away, problematic person of color. We don't like your thinking. Now, that's not welcoming anybody into anything. That is exclusionary. There's a problem with this, and I will quote here Christopher Tolkien from an interview. I typed this out earlier. On the machine. If the ring were not destroyed, it wouldn't matter in the long run whether Sauron got it himself. As he, J.R.R. Tolkien, his dad, said once, Gandalf, if he had had the ring, would have been far worse than Sauron because he would have been righteous and self-righteous and coerced the world to its own good. And that was one of my father's greatest fears, was the coercion for good ends.
Wow. Well, there's a relevant quote.
I kept going back to that. I even tried to gently post it in a few places before I gave up altogether and stopped trying to discuss anything with people who were insisting on discussing race and Tolkien. I've been in battle with some of these people. This was rife in the aughts. This was everywhere. You couldn't turn around without running into a racist blog that hated Muslims and wanted to nuke Mecca and was using a picture of Aragorn and Men of the West. It was co-opted by everyone. So I understand the criticisms that white supremacists have tried to adopt Tolkien as one of their own. I understand it very well, and I was actually doxxed by some of these people back in the elder days of the internet.
Oh, gosh.
Which is a very unpleasant thing to happen. Having a map to your old house on the internet is a little worse than getting a random comment on Twitter. I can attest to both of these.
Quite a bit. Yeah.
So I'm aware that they're there. They were all over the place. And they're still all over the place. And yes, we have to fight them and kick them out. But but we need to discuss the other lack of inclusion that is happening by people who are insisting that hey, your favorite author's a racist, and if you don't agree, we're going to call you names.
Yeah.
I guess the whole point here is the discussion is a discussion, and it's not a discussion if it's only one side. So we really appreciate your input on this. And
absolutely,
we know that we don't expect this episode to go without controversy. So don't worry that you said some strong things. We're grateful for it, and we hope that people will take what you said to heart.
I hope I wasn't too strong there, because I truly, this is actually coming from a place of love, and I want to hug every single person. Well, there's coronavirus, so no, but I want to extend those
in theory,
extend those feelings of warmth to everybody who has felt marginalized or harmed or unwelcomed in any way, shape, or form. And there is a lot of racism. Yes, I was just reading an article about somebody who was criticized for cosplaying or drawing fan art. If you're not white and you want to draw yourself or someone who looks like you, if someone objects to having fan art that's more diverse, or people cosplaying when they're not white, that's racist. I think we can all agree that nobody who's objecting to that is a person of reputable, But I think that we need to extend the love on all fronts here, except to Nazis. Not to the Nazis, but we need to extend the love across the community of people who are coming from racially diverse. The terminology has gotten so strange on all of this, but people of color, BIPOC, whatever your preferred term is, we need to extend the love across the board to everybody and admit that there are some problems in the fandom, but I think one of the biggest problems is honestly that people don't have a place to really discuss, and we need to get back to doing that.
Yeah.
That is great. And thank you for joining us, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Our pleasure.
And once again, we want to thank all of our guests for their courage and their honesty in coming forward to talk to us about this. I know that this is not an easy topic to discuss openly, but we really applaud all of you who did so. I personally found it to be eye-opening, and I hope it'll be the same for our listeners.
Well, I'm sure it will be, because it was for me as well. And I am really grateful to each one of our guests for what they were able to share with us tonight.
Yeah.
Now, folks, please be sure to join us again next week when we will begin our 5-episode journey through Fangorn Forest in Treebeard.
Now, we do want to take a moment to thank our patrons at the Curidan's contributions here. That's DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Jerry in Texas, Bruce in California, Mario in Utah, Seth in Texas, Ella in California, Joseph in Texas, Kathy from North Carolina, Lori from Washington, Josh in Oklahoma, Carlos in California, Brian from the UK, Cameron in Nevada, and Ned from Connecticut. Thank you all so much for your support.
Indeed. And we also want to thank the team that helps make the show better. Our research assistants, along with our Barliman, Becca Davis, producer Jordan Rennells, social media manager Casey Hilsey, event and Patreon community coordinator Katie McKenna, and website guru Phil Dean.
This show would not be what it is without our supporters and our teammates, so thank you all. Now, be sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony podcast. Subscribe to the show through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your thoughts and comments to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com.
Barliman is a lot more reliable than he used to be, but we do get a lot of mail, so we'll get to you as soon as we can. And your question or comment may be featured on a future episode.
Now, as always, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.